smart enough to win. That's how the story starts. Learning is the edge that sets your work apart. When the stakes get high and the pressure never stops, smart learning in your pocket puts your business at the top.
Welcome to the Learning Advantage, from Insight to Impact, where we're going to show how smart learning fuels real business results. I'm Deb Laurel, and I'm your host. Welcome today. I'm happy to see you. For over 40 years, Laurel and Associates Limited has worked alongside national and international managers to help them successfully manage employees and create and maintain a positive, healthy, and supportive work environment where employees want to stay and do their best. We focus on making lackluster leaders legendary. The purpose of the Learning Advantage, from Insight to Impact, is to discuss how smart learning fuels real business results. In each episode, we strive to deliver actionable strategies, evidence-based design tips, and real-world case studies that show how learning strengthens organizational health, advances sustainability, and drives profitability. And for that reason, I'm delighted to introduce our guest for today, Arvind Murwaha. Arvind is a Chief Experience Officer coach and a leadership competence facilitator with more than 35 years of experience. He has helped leaders at many large-sized companies to build the talent, capabilities, and organizational cultures that support business success. He has held Chief Learning Officer, Vice President positions, global and pan-India, at companies like Suzlon, Reliance, IBM, Max Hospitals, and Caltex Corporation. His entrepreneurial approach and deep understanding of business issues helps in providing solutions that enable better business. And he joins us from where, Arvind?
Hi, Deborah. I'm from Mumbai in India. And hello, everybody.
So welcome, Arvind. I'm going to jump right into the questions.
Sure, go ahead.
Arvind, you've worked with organizations across 4 continents for more than 30 years. What's the biggest shift you've seen in how organizations approach leadership development, culture, and learning?
Yeah, Deborah, first of all, thanks for giving this opportunity for me to come onto this program and share my thoughts here. Uh, so, over the last 3 decades, what I see organizations make a shift is going from telling them what to do to helping them figure it out together. Uh, let me paint a picture. So for a long time, the way organizations managed leadership development was send leaders to programs, teach them the right way to lead people, lead businesses, get certifications done, and that's one aspect of it. From a culture perspective, uh, organizations, leadership define the values, HR creates the posters, and emails are sent across. Communication is done on what is the value, vision, mission, value of the organization. To manage learning of the people in their organizations, they have calendar of programs laid out, and they just get people to attend those programs, and it's a tick mark activity which happens. In fact, for quite some time, this has worked actually, because that's the way learning used to work. But the last decade or so, what I've seen is that the business complexities have increased, right? And there is a lot of disruption happening because of technology developments, business disruptions, economic changes, and that has stopped making telling or teaching to be effective. It is no more effective. Uh, and hence, now organizations are slowly shifting to, or rather have done that in the past 5 6 years or decade or so. uh, Instead of teaching leaders what to think, they help them learn how to think together about complex challenges. And from a culture perspective, what I like to say always is going from poster on the walls to conversation in the halls, right? And they try to do that, try to change the way of working. So culture is not merely a statement of values. Culture is the way you work in the organization. Uh, Also, from a learning context, instead of just organizing learning events, they are moving towards what change or impact does learning have on business. So it's more. So today, if you look at it, the content on any topic. So if you want to learn anything, the content is available to people. What they need to do is to process that content and to figure out how best to apply it back into their job, into their lives, right? So in a way, the content or the wisdom is there in the room. We need to facilitate the learning, we need to facilitate the application of it back into the jobs, and that's what companies are trying to do. The challenge has been that while the shift in philosophy or shift in approach has happened, uh, but there's a gap between what they want to do and what they're capable of doing, right? Because earlier everything was centered around subject matter experts, and
Mhm.
now it is more and more shifting towards facilitated learning. So you have to have facilitators who can facilitate that learning, and not only facilitate learning in the learning room, but people who can design the whole learning journey, in the right manner. And that is why, whenever I consult with organizations, I help them build this capability of how do you facilitate learning in your organization. So that's the key piece. But yeah, from telling them to helping them figure it out, uh, from being able to. So I love to call this as, there is always something called the training tourism. So you have these calendar programs there, and you send people there. So you get off work and go and attend the training program, and most of the time it is treated as a holiday. Okay, I'm away from my work pressure, so let me go and enjoy the 2 days of training. Uh, but the effectiveness of that training back into impacting business results is very little. So that's the change which organizations are trying to make, that connect every learning event with some business impact or change they want to bring in. Yeah.
Well, one thing that we have known for a long time is that uh, sending people to a training program and just letting it stop there is not effective. That there is a forgetting curve, and if people don't are not given an opportunity to apply it immediately and have that reinforced, they're going to forget what they learned. And so, as a matter of fact, I guess we would say learning never occurred because it wasn't retained.
Absolutely correct, Deborah. And that is why organizations have been very skeptic about spending money, investing money on learning activities. A lot of organizations do that, but more from a perspective of making employees happy that there is enough learning happening. uh, some organizations have been serious enough and say, hey, no, after you have attended the program, we'll do something post the program and try and make sure that it is applied back on job. But still, it is at a very theoretical level, and actual impact on business, very few organizations are able to measure that. So,
Okay. Most organizations say their leadership development is aligned to business priorities, but
mm.
you've seen the reality. What is the gap between what they say and what actually happens?
Uh, yeah, that's a right thing that there's a massive gap in what organizations actually say and what is the reality. The challenge being that organizations always try to say, hey, our leadership development is aligned to our business priority. Uh, what they're not, or what they're probably missing out is, are they aligned to the leadership challenges? Correct. So business priority might be growth, business priority might be innovation, but the leadership challenge may lie somewhere else. Uh, so uh, first gap is they focus on competencies without uh, being able to think through what challenges the leaders are facing. Correct. Uh, and they design in isolation. People who are designing the learning events or designing the learning piece are not the people who are facing those challenges, and hence there is a mismatch happening. Let me try and give you an example. Uh, we were doing some work for a technology company, and the business need in the technology company is that we need to innovate, and my people are not good at innovation. Correct. So let's run some interventions for innovation, and out of box thinking and that kind of piece. Uh, when I attempt any, or I try to find a solution for any organization, I do go through a discovery phase, and we have some structures for that. When I went through the discovery phase, what we figured out was that there are ideas with people in the organization. They have those innovative ideas, but uh, they are not being expressed because there's a whole culture of blame fixing, and there's a whole culture of hierarchy, and people are not feeling safe enough to express an idea which may or may not work, right? So so we didn't need to do something on how to innovate. The requirement was how to create that culture of psychological safety where ideas can be expressed, and how to enable people to get involved into conversations so that they are able to express their ideas. Uh, and so the competence to be tackled was not innovation. The competence to be tackled was from a conversation perspective. Can you have a free conversation where divergent ideas can emerge without the fear of failure? And once we identified that, then we had to still do something with which the organization can digest. So we called it collective problem solving, and we ran some interventions on that, but the focus majorly was to be able to create the divergent ideas, right, which were already there in the room. They were there with the people. We just need to let it express. So that kind of mismatch a lot of times happens. That what competence you are trying to look. Are you trying to uh, do a good paper on competence development, or are you trying to actually solve the practical problems the business faces, right? And that's where the whole key lies in terms of. So, do you look at organization priorities, or do you look at the leadership challenges? Correct. They're the two different things sometimes. May not be the same all the time. Uh, and are you looking at only the PowerPoint slides for learning, or are you actually looking at the practice of conversations? Correct. So that's the piece which is something sometimes needs to get addressed for leadership development.
I find it interesting that you're saying that leadership uh, priorities may not be the same as business priorities.
And in organizations, there are always agendas going on. So one danger is the leadership agenda could be different from the business agenda. And the bigger danger, which I find invariably uh, almost all organizations, that different leaders in the same organization will have different agenda going on. And unless they align with each other, and they are sort of uh, okay with having differences and yet working together, the growth will not happen. And what starts happening is If it's a mid-size or a little larger organization, there's a leader, and then all the people in that leader's organization team and the people in a different leader's team, those people together also don't work effectively because their hidden agendas are different, their fears are different, and hence free expression of ideas is not easy to come by.
So it sounds like in creating a feeling of psychological safety, you're suggesting that it has to happen leader by leader as opposed to coming from the top.
Or definitely, innovation is a desire which expressed from the top, but innovation always happens from the bottom up, right? And to that extent, it's a little paradoxical in terms of culture, and but yes, it that's the challenge, that it needs to happen at each level of the organization.
Okay. Can you share a specific example where you anchored leadership development to a real business priority and what changed as a result?
Oh, there are quite a few, but let me. So one of the instances which come to my mind, which I enjoyed a lot because it was a massive business change, was working with a manufacturing company in India. They were a forging and casting manufacturing company creating components for uh, renewable energy company. So they were part of a group, bigger group. It's a subsidiary. 80% of their revenues came from selling to uh, uh, within the group. So it was sort of in-source kind of a piece. They were creating parts uh, and selling to within the same group. And 20% was external business. Now the group company, uh, which was into renewables, their business dropped down. And hence this subsidiary, since 80% of the business was dependent on the group company, their business also dropped down. So the new director who came in, he said that the board of directors, they said, okay, now what you need to do is you need to cater to the external market, so that if the group is going down, but you have ability to serve the external market, so increase your revenue share of the external market. But there was a lot of resistance to it because they would have to change the product mix. It would require organization changes, structure changes, and so it was not happening. And somewhere the leaders in the organization figured out that uh, the challenge is in their execution capability. So they cannot execute new projects. So this was given over to me as a challenge, that go and work on their execution capability. But when we did the discovery process, like I said, we do a deep dive and do a discovery process. And in this case, the discovery process itself took about a couple of months for us to figure out what's happening, why it is happening. And what we figured out was, see, that company had been operating for quite some time, and there was a huge resistance to change. As in, these guys were good at execution, but there was a resistance to change, and hence the level at which we had to work was at the change management, right? And we went in fact, I remember we first actually did some kind of a personality mapping of the leadership team for them to understand themselves and each other better, and then figure out what are the areas of resistance of change. So there was an intervention done, there was a coaching piece which done, and then again a couple of interventions. It took about 18 months for the whole process to get in. The net outcome was at about 18 or 20 months time frame, the ratio reversed. Now there were about 75% was external business and only 20-25% was internal business, and that helped the organization uh, prosper and grow, right? So it was very interesting that a subsidiary is actually doing well where the group itself is not doing that well. So it was very, very interesting to that. And that change was massive. And this was a very typical Indian promoter led organization. So it did happen. And The whole thing started from that whole piece of doing non-judgmental discovery, you and one has to be able to do. Frankly speaking, did me or any of the SMEs provide them solutions? No, they had the solutions. It's just that they have to work around that, they have to process it, and they have to figure out. Another big thing we knew but we experienced was that when you facilitate the conversations on change and people decide they have to change, the ownership to change uh, happens a lot. So they own the whole process. And then you sort of are hands off and they take it by themselves.
That's a wonderful example. Thank you. If you could give one piece of advice to learning and development leaders who want to make leadership development truly strategic, not just another program, what would it be?
Uh, See, when we are looking at leadership development, the moment you say leadership development, the thoughts that come to mind are we should have learning events, we should have sources of learning, people may do self learning. Now, with technology coming in, a lot of learning is technology driven. Uh, what we need to understand is that the structured learning is just 10-15% of the whole process. So there is a 70-20-10 uh, structure of learning. 70% learning happens while on job. 20% learning happens by self exploration, talking to peers and getting exposure. And 10% in the structured training room or a structured learning uh, you know, methodology. Uh, so if I were to say, hey, help leaders figure out how to do leadership development of trainers, look out that. I would say focus on facilitating that 70% first. How do you facilitate learning during the job, on job focus? So that is a major piece which we need to underline and move from PowerPoint led learning events or screen led learning events, move towards facilitated conversations. And I say this because in today's environment, with the technology taking up, more and more screen led learning is being encouraged because everything is there on the screen. Today you want everything is there on the screen, and what is not there can be put on the screen in a very easy manner. But reading through the screens or experiencing through the screens has very little effectiveness on real learning. We are talking about leadership. We are talking about leadership behavior, something which, and we are talking about leaders who have developed their behavior for a couple of decades, and now you are telling the leader to change that behavior or better that behavior. It's a difficult thing. So, best way to do that is to enable facilitated conversations, enable collective wisdom to influence the change. So stop developing leaders in isolation and start developing them in the context of real business challenges. Uh, Stop the training tourism, like I said earlier, right? And do it. Focus more on that 70% piece. Uh, so the question isn't that what program should we send the leaders to. The question which you need to process is what is the real challenge we can facilitate them solving, and what needs to be done for that, and that's where we need to do that. The whole piece is that I still see a lot of organizations looking at content mastery. I want a subject matter expert who can come and tell me about this. Um, what they need to focus on is facilitation mastery. In fact, last week I've been in conversation with a technology company. It's a telecom technology company. It's a telecom company, uh, global company, And what they have discovered is they are implementing AI projects, and people are implementing AI projects, but different AI experts are doing different things in different verticals, and it's not aligned, it's not chaotic. So they are trying to engage us as coaches to come. So we are not the AI SMEs, right? We may know AI, but they're not treating us as AI SMEs. But what they want is somebody who can understand that context, but coach people to have a aligned approach to implement AI in the organization. So that's the kind of piece one needs to be able to do. Can you facilitate the learning to solve business challenges?
One of the companies that I founded, the Peer Learning Institute, focuses on exactly that, on bringing peer groups together of managers and leaders who are dealing with the similar problem so that they can help each other work through that and come up with some, not only a solution, but something that could be consistently applied. Because as you're talking about various things, we see that different leaders do things differently. And when they're not aligned, it can be very confusing for employees, for customers, and disrupt the organization. So that's very important that we have some peer groups where they can talk. But that, when we talk about doing something during the course of, in the flow of work, which is what 70% is all about, do you consider having those conversations, those coached conversations, part of the flow of work? Because it would seem like that pulls them out of it also.
So uh, that's a very interesting thought, Deborah, which you are sharing. So is learning not work, right? Is learning not key purpose of a leader? So a KPI of the leader would be and should be, in fact, today all the more important with all the tech disruptions which are happening, with all the business and economic disruptions which are happening across the globe. A key piece is for the leader to keep evolving. It's part of her or his work. So when we look at having on-job conversations, right, it's a strategic decisions that are you embedding the leadership evolution as part of the work of the leader, right? When you do that, that's when the real piece starts happening. And you need to have facilitators or coaches or leaders who have facilitative leadership as a capability to be able to do that. Correct. Uh, so at a technology company, one of the big fours, I can't name it because of confidentiality, but one of the big fours engaged us to do their director level development programs. And their what we structured there was they will always in the program have an external facilitator to facilitate the program and an internal facilitator who will share real uh, on-job experiences with them. That this is what is happening, and that uh, it's a 3 day, 2.5, 3 day workshop, but that is considered as work. Correct. It's an assignment they are given. So as a leader, you get different assignments. So one of the assignments is to complete is that workshop, right? And through that workshop they have to go back and change something and report that change, and impact the business impact has to be tracked. All of that is there, which means the organization will have to have internal leaders trained as facilitators. And I'm talking of one of the big four, so their partner level people are trained as facilitators, are certified as facilitators, and they facilitate the whole learning. So it's a strategic decision to integrate the leadership development as part of the work.
Oh, wonderful. Culture is one of those words everyone uses, but few can define. When you talk about shaping cultures that enable performance and growth, what does that actually mean in practice?
I always love to say this, that go from poster on the walls to conversation in the halls. It is easier said, difficult to do. Uh, and culture has that paradox. It is driven by the top, but it is created by the bottom. So what I want to say is that you could have stated a value, that this is the value we have, but in the way of working, in your daily way of working, are you really supporting that value, right? So we may say, oh, we want to have a, so you would have heard this either in a value called communication or collaboration, that we will do collaborative work, we value collaborative work. But in your actual work, do you have a blame game going on, or do you really have a culture which will enable employees to take responsibility, and hence then they are free to collaborate? uh, do different leaders tell their teams, hey, you know what, I'm telling you, you do this, don't bother about what others are saying? Or are they saying, hey, you know what, this is what we are doing, if others are there who can help you, take the help, if others are there who need your help, please help them. So it's a daily piece which needs to happen. And it's also to make, see, culture is almost any organization which is wide enough has values, stated values. But are you able to make the invisible visible, right? So there's a value. How does it show up in work? Can you talk about that? I was part of a company called Daksh E-Services, which was eventually taken over by IBM. And in that, we had created this practice that every management team meeting, the leadership meeting, which should happen, which is about once a month, one of the leaders would be told, okay, you have to talk on value. When he talks on value, he doesn't talk about the value. He picks up a value and he talks about how was he trying to demonstrate that value, and preferably they would talk about where they failed in demonstrating that value. uh, they would of course sometimes talk about how they actually demonstrated it, but it was encouraged that you talk about where you failed to demonstrate that value. And what it did was it got them thinking, and everybody in the leadership thinking about the value. What does it mean? How it should show up in my daily behavior? And yes, we do fail in doing that, right? So it's a psychological safety. So when a leader is able to say, I made this mistake, the others are automatically encouraged to say, hey, you know what, yes, this is a value we should do. If we make a mistake, accept it, and then move on. So we did that. And of course, conversations is another part of facilitating conversation. Um Culture change requires uh, a lot of facilitative conversation. So there's a tech startup, and they engaged us to set up the value. They wanted to create the value map, and the leaders, there were three founders, and they were all already decided that this is the values. But so they were sort of engaging us, hey, define them further and create it. We said, don't do that. You engage the employees. Let your employees throw up what kind of culture they want. Look at their words. You may still sort of reword whatever they say the way you want to put it across, right? So you can do that, but let employees feel they created the culture, because then the ownership of the culture is much better. Now, to do that, you have to facilitate those conversations, uh, the seriousness about the culture, and get it done. Yeah. So it's a top down and a bottom up piece. It's probably defined top down, but it is implemented bottom up.
Well, and it's also designed mutually in a collaborative way. and that is so important. Um, just thinking about the microcosm of working with a team, beginning by identifying, all right, what are our operating principles? What are our rules of engagement? Creating the culture for that team. And you're talking about doing it on an organization wide basis, which
Absolutely, absolutely. And also, we need to remember there is diversity within the organization. So when you say let's have an open culture, it may mean different for different people, right? And so there are cultures where asking for help is considered, uh, it's something like it's my weakness because I'm asking for help. And in some other cultures, asking for help is just normal, you know. And the reverse way around, somewhere providing help is like I'm being God to you, and in other cultures, providing help is just a transaction, you know. So we have to be sensitive to those uh, diversity in the cultures, and and then and sometimes we feel, oh, we are working in one country, it's same economic. Even there would be diversity, right? And one has to be able to tackle that, and uh, or be aware of that in a way, right? When you're building a company culture.
well, you also need some consistent definition of what it means, because we
Right.
can't have that being so divergently determined that it isn't a culture, that it is whatever happens, happens.
Absolutely, you're absolutely right. Absolutely.
What's the biggest mistake organizations make when trying to transform their culture, and how do you help them avoid it?
uh, One obvious mistake is just what we were talking about, that people tend not to own what they don't create. So it has to be collectively created. People need to get a feeling they had a say in creating the culture, right? There are certain aspects. Uh, so for example, an organization may say, the leadership may say, hey, you know what? Integrity is, no, there's no compromise on integrity. And one has to say, hey, is that a culture or is that a rule of the organization? You know, uh, so it may not be culture; it may be rule. Culture is the way you operate. Rules are what you abide by, right? So, for example, at a leadership level, I may not be encouraged to take any gifts from any vendor, right? Because it's like part of that rule of integrity. But that's not culture. Culture would probably be, am I being transparent enough with my peers, with my juniors, to the extent I can be transparent, right? But am I transparent in my agenda? Am I transparent in my purpose, in what I'm doing? That could be the culture. And you mentioned something very important, Deborah, that it needs to be defined. It cannot be abstract, right? Uh, it has to be well defined, and not only well defined in terms of definition on a paper, but defined in terms of how does that appear in behaviors. Correct. So, for example, I could say we are all collaborative, and the leader is sitting in a meeting and saying, "Hey, man, I hope everybody is feeling nice about in this team, isn't it?" And, and the way and the tone in which the leader would say actually tells you that this is not a open environment, right? So the behavior needs to be in sync with uh, what the value is. And another mistake companies do is that culture is a one-way dialogue. We have the values, we're going to teach you the values. Just try to visualize, there's a company operating with values, has been operating with quite some time. The values are deeply embedded, everything is fine. And now a new bunch of employees are hired, and they are going through their induction. And through when they are going through the induction, they are told the values, and the values are dumped onto them. This is what the value is. But Are you having a two-way dialogue? Are you checking with them? Are they comfortable with the values? Or do they understand those values? What are their thoughts about those values? Right? And one has to check on that. Again, it's all about having conversations around the values, right? What are their thoughts? Because they also need to own the values and the culture, right? Uh, Also, sometimes organizations may be blindfolded about what culture they have. Uh, so, so is the organization there where the truth can be told that no, we are not like this, we are like this, right? We are a hierarchical organization. So this company which I gave you the earlier example, the uh, renewable energy organization, and they wanted to great place of work. They wanted to uh, go through that whole engagement on great place of work and be able to say we are a great place of work and all that. And I had to, fortunately for me, I was able to, and I was given that opportunity that I had to sort of state the truth that we are a very hierarchical organization. We are an authoritative organization. And from a business perspective, it may be fine that you are that way, but we have to understand that and then make people uh, aware of what it is and aware of how much challenge they can do to the authority. Are there ways of challenging the authority? Are there ways of expressing the ideas? And failure uh, is not a bad thing to happen, right? If you are growing, failure is part and parcel of the process. Yes, you will have to be accountable. You will have to, look at the business results, but it's okay to fail. So that kind of cultural shift was little difficult to do, but knowing the truth starts the process.
Later this week, I'm going to be working with Ethan Sanders, who has been interviewed on this program, to look at how companies can use their engagement surveys
Oh yes.
to identify who are the managers that most engage their employees and what is it they do specifically, what are their behaviors, so that those can be replicated in the whole organization, so that there is a culture designed around not generic ideas but specific behaviors, which I invite everyone to come to.
Oh sure, would love to be there.
I have another question. You mentioned turning learning into a strategic lever, not a side activity. What does
Hmm.
that shift look like, and what role does facilitation play in making it happen?
Uh, when I say strategic levers move the business. Side activities just keep people busy, right? Uh, so when you have learning happening as a side activity, it keeps people busy. Uh, it's learning before work has happened, right? So you learn and you do the work, but in that you have to try and apply the learning at to the work. Very few people try that, and those who try, for some it works, some it doesn't work. So actually, learning translating into actual application of the work and making a business impact, that ratio is very pathetic. But when you have if when you think of learning or design the learning experience as a strategic piece, then you're in, so you're talking about, okay, what is the challenge, and to overcome this challenge, what do I need to do I need to learn, do I need to do something? And so it's part of your work, it's part of your challenge solving or problem solving piece, and hence the application is almost immediate and business moves forward, right? uh, And here's a critical insight: this shift works only if you are able to uh, manage the learning through a facilitative approach. Otherwise, it will not work. Correct? Uh, so, to give you an example, there's a group of schools here, and their challenge was the business was stagnating, and somewhere they needed a strategic shift to provide better quality education and also increase the revenues. And somewhere somebody thought about, okay, maybe my leaders are not thinking strategically. So they again called us to do run a strategic thinking workshop. Now, if I look at strategic thinking workshop for a leader, it would have been a one-off activity. They'd have come and gone back and tried to apply the learning. What we did was we went through our discovery design process. So we did the whole discovery piece with them, and then we figured out that they actually need to work on the strategy itself. So instead of doing a strategic thinking workshop, we did a strategic planning exercise with them, where the leaders actually we facilitated their thought process and they started making strategic pieces. They need to understand what does the word strategy mean first of all, right? And so we do a program called Strategic Works 360, and through that piece we enable them to build the strategy, create a plan, execution plan, and it was a sort of extended. So it was not a one-day workshop. So it was an intervention followed with coaching, followed with consulting sessions. So they were building the strategy while learning how to build the strategy, right? And we did a lot of facilitative huddles for them, in which they worked through. Uh, so evolution of leadership through the projects, through the problem solving, worked much better there uh, than having a isolated workshop and then they go back and try to figure out what to do with it. So when I say that learning has to be a strategic lever, it means, is it part of the way you work, right? Are you planning out the learning time uh, in the leader's uh, work time, right? That okay, this much percentage time will go into learning on job, right? And that's when it starts happening, making an impact on business. In fact, when you do that, then businesses are willing to invest the time, energy, and resource in learning. Otherwise, businesses look at learning as a cost, right? But when they are able to integrate it in a as a strategic move, then it's an investment, right? And that's the difference which starts happening. I hope I was able to answer that question.
Oh, you were. You were. Now, you
Right.
have mentioned facilitation in almost every discussion that we've been going through today. You want to define what you mean by facilitation.
Uh, when I say for and thanks for asking that question, Deborah, because it's a very misunderstood word. And when I mention facilitation, what I mean is, are you able to facilitate the conversations, the thought processes of people uh, without being directive, in a very psychological, safe environment, in a very inclusive manner, and are you able to help them get their own divergent thoughts, and by their own processing they come to some point of convergence, right? So instead of somebody standing and saying this is the right way of communication, can they process all the information available on what are the different ways of communication and figure out what's the best way or manner of communication that works for their business, for their teams, right? So uh, facilitation has a lot of something which I call as grown zone, right? Where you have a lot of divergent thoughts and nothing seems to get to a convergent point. And that's where a facilitator plays the role of a facilitator, where they help people still keep processing their thoughts and by themselves come to a point of convergence, right? And when I've done facilitation sessions, uh, a lot of times you went in thinking, okay, this is the problem, and we're going to help people or facilitate people overcome this problem. But during the whole process, what emerges is something very different. And then they figure out, okay, this is a different problem we have to figure out. And then they take a call whether we are going to tackle it here right now, or we're going to have a separate conversation on this, what we want to do. So facilitation per se is enabling people to have conversations, express their thoughts, process their thoughts, reflect as well as discuss both, right? And then come to some decisions they want to make, mostly as a collective decisions they want to make, right? And collective decisions are the best decisions, right? uh, there is a lot to this facilitation, and we do run a facilitation mastery course. In fact, in June we're going to be running a professional facilitation mastery course. uh, we are also creating an online knowledge base for that, which will be available for people across the globe. Uh, but the course we are running in June has a 3 day in person workshop. But yes, and it's not just for HR or L&D personnel. Facilitation is something which needs to be picked up by business leaders. Like I was sharing, one of the big fours, there are even partner level people get certified as facilitators, right? So it's a really a very powerful methodology of helping people process their thoughts.
Thank you. I have one more question. These three topics, leadership development, culture, and strategic learning, they're all connected. What's the thread that ties them together? And what's one thing leaders can do this week to start making this shift?
I think leaders should immediately attempt to uh, enable or facilitate conversations at whatever level they can. So instead of a leader, there was a time when leaders were supposed to have all the answers, and they had answers. Even today, there are many leaders who have the answers. But the time today is that if you give an answer, the adult sitting across you is not going to take that as an answer, right? They're not going to accept it very easily. So it's a better thing, to more effective thing for a leader, to enable them to have some conversations, right? And then be able to provide their own inputs in those conversations. They're part of the conversations. They provide their inputs into those conversations. Let people process their emotions, process their thoughts, and then you come up with the decisions that you want to take, right? Today, technology is disrupting the economic or the business scenarios developing across the globe are disrupting, the supply chains are disrupting, a lot of disruption happening. And anyways, the whole innovation piece is happening. All of this is having an impact on people, right? The other day we were having a chat in a forum where it was very interesting that there are people who are training AI to do their job. They're creating AI agents who are doppelgangers, and they are creating their own. So how does this AI agent do what I am doing? And an underlying message or thought is there is, once this guy is trained, this agent, tech agent is trained on doing my job, then I don't have a job. So can you imagine the kind of mental, psychological pressure these guys are working under? So leaders will have to enable conversations happening all across. The moment they are able to facilitate those conversations, a lot of changes will happen.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Arvind. This has been wonderful. How can people get in touch with you?
Deborah, I'm available on LinkedIn, Arvind Murwaha. On the LinkedIn, they can go to our site, Cresco Consulting, Cresko, crescoconsulting.com. They can go there. If you look at my spellings, Murwaha, it's a very unique spelling. So the moment you type that, you will invariably find me.
Wonderful. So thank you, Arvind, and thank you for listening in and participating in our conversation. I hope that you
Thanks.
learned as much as I learned in this session.
Oh, yes, Deborah, I think the questions you put up are very deep questions. They enabled me to reflect within myself, and I will think more about them. But thanks for inviting me for this. Thank you very much. It's been a very, very productive conversation.
Thank you for agreeing. I'm very appreciative of that.
Thank you.
Please join us next week on April 28th as we meet with Buckley Brinkman, the Executive Director and CEO of the Wisconsin Manufacturing Extension Partnership from June 2011 to December 2025. And please remember that Laurel and Associates Limited is always focused on making lackluster leaders legendary as smart learning fuels real business results. And as we've discussed today, when we're talking about learning and we're talking about facilitation and we're talking about leadership, it is a partnership between leaders and learning advisors and facilitators. And that involves both your managers and your trainers. So please contact me for a copy of a two-part assessment that you can give to determine the effectiveness of your trainers and managers. And thank you all again for joining us. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Learning Advantage from Insight to Impact. We'll look forward to seeing you again next week.
Every lesson, every workshop, every failed attempt you save becomes a map upon the desktop, shows the